Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
This happened a few years ago when I was renting a small, one-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of an older building. It wasn't the nicest place, but it was cheap, and I was a broke college student, so I made do. I had always been a light sleeper, but shortly after moving in, I started waking up at odd hours for no reason. I'd feel cold, like a draft was blowing over me, but my windows were always closed. I even checked the seals, thinking maybe they were letting in air, but they were fine. One night, around 3 a.m., I woke up feeling that same chill. The apartment was silent except for the soft hum of my mini fridge. I rolled over and stared at the ceiling, trying to figure out why I was so awake. Then I heard it, a faint scraping sound. It was coming from the air vent above my bed. I sat up slowly, my heart picking up speed. It wasn't a one-time noise, it was rhythmic, scratch, pause, scratch, like something was dragging itself along metal. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe an animal had gotten into the vents, but I was on the top floor. There was nothing above me but the roof. The way the vent was positioned, something would have had to crawl up 3 floors of ductwork to get there. Then the scraping stopped. I held my breath, staring at the vent. My phone was on my nightstand, and I slowly reached for it, ready to turn on the flashlight. Before I could, the vent cover shifted. Not a lot, just a tiny movement, but enough that I saw the screws tremble. I froze. Every hair on my body stood on end. My mind went blank with terror. I wanted to convince myself it was my imagination, but then a single whisper came from the vent. A voice so quiet I almost thought I was imagining it. I said, "You." I launched myself out of bed, grabbed my keys, and ran out of the apartment barefoot. I didn't stop until I was in my car, hands shaking so badly I could barely get the engine started. I called my landlord and told him something was in the vents, some kind of animal. I didn't mention the whisper, I knew how crazy it would sound. He said he'd send someone to check in the morning. I refused to go back inside that night. I drove to my friend's place and crashed on her couch. The next day, the maintenance guy checked the vent and said there was nothing there. No signs of animals, no debris, nothing that could have made that noise. He even unscrewed the vent cover to show me, nothing but dust inside. I moved out 3 weeks later. After moving out of that apartment, I swore I would never live alone again. For the next couple of years, I always made sure I had a roommate. It gave me some peace of mind, someone to validate that I wasn't losing my mind if anything weird happened. But even after I left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. The first incident happened about a month after I moved into my new place, a small house I shared with my friend Megan. One night, we were watching a movie in the living room when the room suddenly got cold. Megan got up to check the thermostat, but it was set to 72 as usual. Must be a draft, she said, shrugging, but I couldn't stop staring at the vent above the TV. I tried to push the thought out of my mind, but when I went to bed that night, I found myself lying awake, staring at the vent in my ceiling. It wasn't the same one from my old apartment, of course, but it felt familiar. A few nights later, Megan mentioned hearing strange noises in the vents, scratching and tapping. She joked that we probably had mice. I laughed along with her, but inside, I felt sick. Then, one night, it escalated. I was asleep when I woke up to the sound of footsteps. At first, I thought it was Megan walking down the hall, but the sound wasn't coming from the floor. It was coming from above me in the ceiling. I froze, listening as the footsteps moved slowly, deliberately above my room. They weren't quick, scurrying sounds like an animal. These were heavy, deliberate steps. I texted Megan, "Are you awake? Do you hear that?" No response. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and shined it at the vent. I didn't see anything at first, but then the vent cover shifted. My heart stopped. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Slowly, something slid into view. It was small, about the size of a tennis ball, and pale. It took me a moment to realize what I was looking at. Something was looking at me through the vent. I screamed and bolted out of my room, banging on Megan's door until she opened it. She looked terrified, and I quickly explained what I'd seen. We both grabbed whatever we could use as a weapon and went back to my room. The vent cover was back in place. I wanted to believe I'd imagined it, but Megan pointed out something chilling. There were faint, greasy smudges on the edges of the vent cover as if something had pressed against it. We called the landlord the next morning and insisted on having the entire HVAC system inspected. The repair guy said everything looked normal, no animals, no damage, nothing out of the ordinary. But I knew what I'd seen. Megan and I didn't stay in that house much longer. A few weeks later, we both started hearing faint whispers at night, too quiet to make out. but unmistakably human. Megan and I got out of that house as fast as we could. She moved in with her boyfriend, and I found another apartment across town. It was in a newer building with modern HVAC systems, no old vents, and, most importantly, no creepy history. I told myself this was a fresh start, no more weird noises, no more whispers. For the first few weeks, everything was fine. I slept better than I had in years. I almost convinced myself that whatever had happened before was just stress or a bad dream. Then, one night, it happened again. I woke up to the feeling of cold air brushing over me, not from my ceiling fan, not from my window, but from somewhere above me. I sat up and looked at the vent across the room. It was closed. Relief flooded me for a split second, until I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The vent cover was loose. It wasn't hanging open, but one of the screws looked slightly undone, as if someone had started to remove it. My pulse pounded in my ears. I tried to shake it off, telling myself maybe it had been that way and I just hadn't noticed. I forced myself to roll over and close my eyes. That's when I heard it. A breath. Not not the quiet hum of the building. A slow, deliberate inhale, followed by an even slower exhale. Right above I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream. I just lay there, my body rigid, my mind racing. Then something shifted in the vent. A soft, dragging sound, like something adjusting its position. It was back. I don't remember jumping out of bed. I don't remember grabbing my phone, but somehow I found myself in my bathroom with the door locked, my hands shaking as I dialed my mom. She picked up groggily, confused by my panic, but I couldn't even form words. I stayed in that bathroom until sunrise. That morning, I did what I should have done years ago. I researched. I found a forum, one of those deep web horror threads where people shared encounters with things that didn't quite fit into normal reality. I hesitated before typing, but eventually I posted my story. I described everything, the vents, the whisper, the eye. Most of the replies were jokes or ghost stories, but then, buried among them, one response caught my attention. It was from a user with no profile picture and a string of random letters as their username. Their comment was short: "It knows you saw it. That's why it follows you. Don't look at it again." I stared at the message, my hands ice cold. Another user responded: "Did it whisper to you? Did it say your name?" I didn't reply. I deleted my post. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my bed, watching the vent, daring it to move. It didn't, but the next night, I woke up to something even worse. A new whisper, right next to my ear. "You shouldn't have told." I don't remember screaming, but I know I did. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and my shoes, and I left. I didn't even lock the door behind me. I drove straight to a motel and checked in for the night. I moved out the next week. I was staying at my aunt's house for the weekend. She lived in a small town about an hour away, in one of those old houses that had too many rooms and never quite felt warm. It wasn't creepy, exactly, but something about it always made me uneasy, like it was just too quiet when the sun went down. She had set up a guest room for me, one I'd never stayed in before. It was a cozy little space with a large wooden wardrobe, a rocking chair in the corner, and an old-fashioned mirror bolted to the wall above the dresser. The mirror caught my eye right away. It was one of those antique ones with a slightly warped surface, giving reflections a stretched, unnatural look. The first night, I got up around 2 a.m. to use the bathroom. As I passed the mirror, I hesitated. Something about my reflection seemed off, like a half-second delay between my movement and its reaction. I told myself I was just groggy and went back to bed. The second night, things got weirder. I was lying in bed scrolling on my phone when I caught movement in the mirror from the corner of my eye. I turned quickly, expecting to see a shadow or maybe just my own reflection shifting as I moved. But no, I was perfectly still, yet the reflection of my bed was empty. Though I sat up and waved my hand. The reflection mimicked me, but there was a split-second hesitation, like before. My chest felt tight. I grabbed my phone and took a quick photo of the mirror. The flash made the whole room look eerie, but what made my stomach drop was the picture itself. In the photo, my reflection was there, but my eyes were closed. I hadn't blinked when I took the picture. I was staring right at the mirror. I spent the rest of the night facing the wall. The next morning, I told my aunt. She got quiet, then sighed. "That mirror belonged to my grandmother," she said. "She always told me never to look into it after midnight." She didn't elaborate, just asked if I wanted to switch rooms. I said yes. I switched rooms without hesitation, moving into the smaller guest bedroom down the hall. It lacked the eerie antique decor of the other room, and most importantly, there was no mirror. I told myself I was being dramatic, that it was just a trick of the light or my overactive imagination. But my aunt's reaction lingered in my mind. She knew something, and she wasn't telling me. That night, I slept slept better ... At first. Around 3 a.m., I woke up suddenly, unsure of why. The house was silent, save for the occasional creak of old wood settling. I rolled over, pulling the covers tighter around me. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The guest room door was open. I was certain I had shut it before going to bed. My heart pounded as I stared into the dark hallway, my eyes adjusting to the dim glow of the nightlight my aunt kept plugged into the wall. I wanted to believe she had come to check on me, maybe left it open by accident, but I hadn't heard footsteps. And then I noticed the rocky chair in the hallway, the same chair from the mirror room. It hadn't been there before. It was just sitting outside my door, its silhouette barely visible in the faint light. A deep, gnawing unease settled in my stomach. The chair was facing my room. I had the overwhelming sense that something was sitting in it, watching. I reached for my phone, the dim glow of the screen feeling like a lifeline. I debated texting my aunt, but what would I say? Instead, I opened the camera app and slowly lifted the phone, angling it toward the open doorway. The second the screen showed the hallway, I froze. In the reflection on my phone, the mirror was still in the guest room. That was impossible. My aunt had moved it out earlier that day, but there it was, visible in the reflection, bolted to the wall as if it had never been removed. And in the mirror, the rocking chair wasn't empty. There was something sitting in it, a tall, gaunt figure, its face featureless except for the deep, gaping holes where its eyes should have been. Its long fingers were curled around the armrest, and its head was tilted slightly ... as if it was listening. My breath hitched. Then the chair creaked. I didn't wait. I slammed the door shut and bolted across the room, shoving the dresser against it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type as I texted my aunt. "Me, are you awake? Me, please tell me you just moved the rocking chair." No response. I sat there, heart pounding, every noise amplified in the stillness. I stared at the door, half expecting it to creak open, for whatever was out there to slip inside. But nothing happened. After what felt like an eternity, my phone vibrated. "And don't come out. Stay where you are." That was it. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke up to daylight streaming through the window. The door was still blocked, no signs of anything unusual. But when I finally worked up the courage to push the dresser aside and peek into the hallway, the rocking chair was gone. I found my aunt in the kitchen, making tea. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. "I think you should go home today," she said quietly, not looking at me. I didn't argue. As I packed my things, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Before I left, I asked her one last time, "What's with the mirror?" She hesitated, then sighed. "It belonged to my grandmother. She used to say mirrors can hold onto things. Memories. People." She looked at me, her expression unreadable. She always said it was a listening mirror. I frowned. "What does that mean?" She said if you stand in front of it too long, it starts listening to you. And if you listen back, she trailed off, shaking her head. I didn't press further. I just wanted to leave. As I pulled out of the driveway, I glanced at the house one last time. I didn't look back after that. I drove straight home, gripping the wheels so tight my knuckles turned white. I blasted music, rolled down the windows, anything to shake the feeling of wrongness that still clung to me. But it wasn't that easy. That night, in the safety of my own apartment, I still felt watched. Every reflective surface, a TV screen, my bathroom mirror, even my phone screen when it went dark, made my skin crawl. I ended up covering the mirrors in my bedroom with towels. It didn't make the feeling go away completely, but it helped. For a while, nothing happened. I convinced myself it was all in my head. Until a week later, it started with my phone. I woke up one morning to find a photo in my camera roll that I did not take. My stomach lurched when I saw it. It was a picture of me, asleep in bed. The angle suggested it had been taken from inside my bedroom. I sat frozen, heart hammering, staring at the photo. My brain scrambled for explanations. Maybe I had accidentally taken it somehow. Maybe it was a glitch. Then I saw the timestamp, 3:07 a.m., the same time I had woken up at my aunt's house, the same time the rocking chair had appeared outside my door. I couldn't breathe. I tore the blankets off and searched every inch of my apartment, checked the windows, the locks, the closet, under the bed. Everything was normal. Nothing was out of place, except for one thing. One of the towels I had placed over my bedroom mirror had fallen off. It was lying on the floor as if it had been carefully removed. And the mirror, it was tilted slightly outward, like something had been leaning out. I left my apartment that night and stayed at a friend's place. I didn't tell them what happened. I didn't even know how to explain it, just that I couldn't be alone. But the worst part, when I checked my phone again the next morning, the picture was gone, completely wiped from my camera roll. No trace of it in my deleted photos, no backup in my cloud storage. It was like it had never been there. I live in a pretty rural area, think long stretches of road with barely any street lights, surrounded by thick forest on both sides. At night, it gets dark, the kind of dark where you can't see your own hand in front of your face if there's no moon. One night, I was driving home from a friend's house. It was past midnight, and there was almost no traffic on the road. I was about 10 minutes from my house when I saw something standing in the middle of the road. At first, I thought it was a dog. It was big, maybe the size of a German Shepherd, but it wasn't moving, just standing there, staring at my approaching car. I slowed down, expecting it to either run off or at least flinch when I got closer. It didn't. My headlights illuminated it fully, and that's when I realized something was off. It wasn't shaped quite right. Its legs were too long, its torso a little too thin, its fur looked patchy, almost like it had mange, but the skin underneath looked stretched and taut. Its eyes were completely black, like two holes in its face, reflecting none of my headlights. At this point, I had come to a full stop, maybe 10 feet from it. The thing still wasn't moving, just staring at me. I don't know how long I sat there, gripping my steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Then, very slowly, it started to move, but not like an animal. Its limbs bent in the wrong directions, jerking in unnatural angles as it took a step toward me. I did the only rational thing I could think of. I slammed my foot on the gas and swerved around it. As I passed, I caught a glimpse of its mouth stretching open, far wider than any dog's mouth should. I didn't stop until I reached my driveway. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I sat in my locked car for a good 5 minutes, staring at my rearview mirror, expecting to see something creeping up behind me. The road I was on is one I've driven my whole life. I knew the wildlife in my area. That wasn't a coyote. That wasn't a stray dog. After that night, I did everything I could to avoid that road after dark. It added an extra 10 minutes to my drive, but I didn't care. I wasn't taking any chances. For a while, I convinced myself that maybe it had been a trick of my exhausted brain. Maybe I had imagined it, or it had been some horribly sick animal with a deformity. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. About a month later, my neighbor, let's call him Rick, came over to help me patch up some fencing on my property. He's one of those old school guys who's lived in this area his whole life, knows every inch of the land like the back of his hand. We were talking about random stuff when I casually mentioned my experience on the road, trying to play it off like a weird animal sighting. Rick stopped hammering. He turned to look at me, his expression unreadable. You saw it, he said flatly. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. So what? Rick wiped his hands on his jeans, then glanced out at the tree line. Been around here for years. My granddad saw it. My dad saw it. Hell, I saw it once when I was about your age. Always the same description. Too long, too thin, and those black eyes. I stared at him. So what is it? He hesitated, then said, depends who you ask. Some folks say it's a skinwalker, others say it's something older. But whatever it is, it ain't natural. And adult life being seen. That last sentence made my stomach drop. You think it? I hesitated, not wanting to sound insane. You think it knows I saw it? Rick was quiet for a long time before he said, I'd keep your curtains shut at night if I were you. I laughed nervously, but Rick didn't. He just gave me this grim, knowing look before changing the subject. That night, for the first time in years, I locked all my doors and made sure every curtain was tightly drawn, just in case. Part 3, the scratching. Weeks passed. I started to relax. Maybe it was just a freak thing, something I'd never be able to explain but didn't need to worry about. I went back to my routine, though I still avoided that stretch of road at night. Then, about 2 months after the sighting, something happened that made my blood run cold. It was late, probably close to 2 a.m. I was watching TV in my living room when I heard it. A soft, scratching sound. It was coming from outside. At first, I thought maybe a branch was scraping against the house. But then I heard it again, slow, deliberate, like something testing the surface. My stomach turned to ice. I stood up and, against every instinct screaming at me not to, I moved toward the window. The curtains were closed, just like Rick had warned. I hesitated, my breath shallow. Then, the scratching stopped. Silence. I stood there, heart hammering in my chest. I don't know how long I waited, but eventually, I forced myself to back away. I turned off the TV, crept to my bedroom, and locked the door. The next morning, I checked outside. There were no branches near my window, nothing that could have made that noise. But right below the windowsill, in the dirt, I saw the long, thin drag marks, like clawed fingers had scraped against the house. After that night, I barely slept. Every little noise outside sent my nerves into overdrive. I kept my phone on full brightness, my keys within reach, and a bat by my bed. Days turned into weeks, and nothing else happened. I told myself it was over, that maybe I had imagined the scratching, but deep down, I didn't believe it. Then, something happened that proved I wasn't crazy. It was a Sunday night. I had just finished eating dinner when my lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. Not unusual. We get power outages now and then, especially in bad weather. But that night, there was no storm, no wind. The air outside was completely still. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. I figured I'd check the breaker box out back, but as soon as I stepped toward the door, I froze. Something was moving in my yard. I couldn't see it, not yet, but I felt it. You know that sensation when someone's staring at you, even when you can't see them. It was like that, but worse. I slowly moved to the window, making sure to stay behind the curtain. My phone's dim glow was the only light in the house. Then, just for a split second, I saw it. A silhouette standing at the edge of my property, just beyond the tree line. Tall, thin, and rugged. It wasn't moving, just standing there, facing my house. Watching, I backed away from the window, heart hammering. I wanted to call someone, Rick, the cops, anyone, but what was I supposed to say? Hey, there's something in my yard that looks like a deformed dog man. Please help. Yeah, no. Instead, I locked every door in my house, double-checked my windows, and sat in my room with my back against the wall, bat in my lap, waiting for the power to come back. It took 3 hours. When the lights flickered back on, I immediately rushed to check outside. Nothing. No footprints. No broken branches. No sign of anything at all. But I knew what I saw, and I knew it wasn't over. A few nights later, I was lying in bed, trying to convince myself I was just paranoid. I hadn't heard the scratching again, and I hadn't seen anything else in my yard. Maybe, just maybe, it was done with me. Then I heard it. A voice. It wasn't loud, but it was right outside my window. It whispered low, slow, almost playful. Come outside. My blood turned to ice. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I said you. The voice was wrong. It didn't sound fully human. It had an edge to it, like someone trying to sound human but not quite getting it right. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it to stop. Then came the worst part. It left. A slow, dragging chuckle, like something was mocking me. And then silence. I don't remember falling asleep that night. I think my brain just shut down from exhaustion and fear. But the next morning, I found something outside my window. Footprints. Not dog prints. Not human prints. Something in between. Long, clawed toes. Too dipped of a fake. Leading from the tree line, stopping directly under my bedroom window. I was hiking alone in a national forest, something I've done dozens of times without issue. I always take the usual precautions, letting someone know my route, carrying a GPS, extra water, even a personal locator beacon in case of an emergency. I've encountered all kinds of wildlife before, but what happened on this trip wasn't an animal. It was something else. I was about 7 miles into my hike when I heard my own voice call my name. It was coming from somewhere ahead of me. At first, I thought I must have been hearing things. The wind through the trees, the way sound carries in the mountains, it plays tricks on you. But then I heard it again, clearer, closer, my own voice, calling my name. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heartbeat suddenly loud in my ears. The rational part of my brain tried to reason through it. Maybe there was a hiker ahead of me who happened to have a voice like mine. Maybe sound was bouncing weirdly through the trees. But the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. Cautiously, I called out, "Hello, is someone there?" A second of silence. Then, from the trees ahead of me, I heard my own voice reply, "Yes, I'm lost." Every hair on my body stood up. The voice was identical to mine, but something about the way it spoke, flat, empty, like an echo of something that had never been alive, made my stomach twist. I didn't move. I didn't answer. The forest was suddenly too quiet. No birds, no wind, nothing. Then, the worst part, the underbrush ahead of me moved. Not like something stepping through it, but like something was crawling under it, distorting the ground as it came toward me. I read, and I don't remember much after that. Just the overwhelming terror, the adrenaline, the sound of something dragging itself through the leaves behind me. I ran until my legs burned, until I could hear the normal sounds of the forest again. Birds chirping, wind in the trees, like nothing had ever happened. When I finally made it back to my car, I sat there for a long time, heart hammering, scanning the tree line, expecting to hear my own voice calling out to me again. I don't hike alone anymore. I didn't tell anyone about what happened that day, not because I didn't want to, trust me, I wanted to, but because I couldn't explain it in a way that didn't make me sound insane. At first, I convinced myself it had been a trick of my mind, some kind of auditory hallucination brought on by exhaustion, maybe an echo bouncing off the trees in a weird way, maybe even some kind of animal mimicking human speech. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true, because the voice knew my name, and worse, it had sounded exactly like me. For weeks after, I kept replaying the encounter in my head, trying to find a rational explanation. Then, about a month later, something happened that shattered any illusions I had left. I was at home, getting ready for bed, when my phone rang. It was nearly midnight, and I didn't recognize the number. My stomach twisted with unease, but I answered it anyway. Hello. At first, there was silence. Then, so faint I almost couldn't hear it, a voice whispered back. My voice. I'm lost. I dropped the phone. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost couldn't breathe. The call ended on its own, and when I checked my phone, there was no record of it. No missed call, no number in my recent history. I barely slept that night. Every creak of my house, every distant sound outside made my skin crawl. The next morning, I checked the locks on my doors and windows twice. I told myself it was just a dream, that I had imagined it, but I knew I hadn't. I tried to move on, and I really did. But a few weeks later, I was leaving for work when I noticed something that made my blood turn to ice. Footprints, not boot prints, not running shoes, bare feet. They led from the tree line at the edge of my property to my bedroom window. And the worst part, they were mine. After that day, I stopped trying to convince myself it was all in my head. The phone call, the voice in the woods, the footprints, it was real. Something was imitating me, and it was getting closer. I became paranoid. I stopped hiking altogether. I installed security cameras around my house, floodlights, even motion sensors. I kept my phone on me at all times, dreading another call from that thing. But weeks passed, then months, and nothing happened. Until last night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to a sound outside my window. It wasn't loud, just a soft, rhythmic tap, tap, tap against the glass. My stomach twisted as I turned over in bed, dread pulling in my chest. I didn't want to look, but I had to. The curtains were only partially drawn, just enough for me to see the bottom half of my bedroom window. The streetlights outside cast a dim glow, illuminating a shape standing just outside the glass. Bare feet, my bare feet. They were pale, dirty, standing perfectly still on the concrete. I couldn't see the rest of it through the curtain, but I knew if I pulled them back, I'd be staring at my own face. The slow, rasping sound filled the air, and I realized it was breathing. Like breathing. I grabbed my phone with trembling hands and pulled up my security camera app. My heart was hammering so hard I could barely think. The feed loaded, and I swiped to the camera that faced my bedroom window. There was nothing there. No fate, no shadow, just the empty driveway. But the tapping didn't stop. I swallowed hard and forced myself to move. With shaking hands, I flicked on the lamp beside my bed. Light flooded the room, and in an instant, the sound stopped. I stayed up the rest of the night, clutching a kitchen knife, staring at that window. When morning came, I forced myself outside. There, in the dirt just below my window, were the footprints. My footprints, but there was something else, too. They didn't just lead up to my window. They led away into the woods behind my house. And about 20 feet into the tree line, where the ground was still soft from the rain the night before, the footprint stopped. Not faded, not disappeared into undergrowth, just stopped. They had a beautiful home in a quiet, upscale neighborhood. It was a 2-story house with a pool in the backyard, and honestly, I was excited to have the place to myself for a week. The first couple of nights were completely normal. I fed their cat, watched TV, and lounged by the pool. But on the third night, I woke up to the distinct sound of laughter. It was faint but unmistakable, childlike giggling echoing down the hallway. I froze. The family I was house sitting for didn't have kids. I was supposed to be alone. At first, I told myself I had imagined it. Maybe it was a dream. But then I heard the quiet pitter-patter of small feet running down the upstairs hallway, the kind of quick, playful footsteps a child would make. I sat up in bed, heart racing, and listened. Silence. I gathered my courage and walked out into the hall, my phone flashlight casting long shadows against the walls. I checked every room, even the closets. Nothing. The house was locked up tight, trying to shake it off. I went back to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. The next night, things escalated. Around 2 a.m., I woke up again, this time to the sound of whispering. It was coming from the corner of the bedroom, just past the foot of my bed. My breath caught in my throat. It was a child's voice, soft and sing-songy, but I couldn't make out the words. I bolted upright and turned on my bedside lamp, heart hammering. The whispering stopped immediately, but just as I was about to convince myself I was losing my mind, I heard it, one last whisper so close to my ear it made my skin crawl. Come play with me. I didn't stay in that house another night. I called the homeowners the next morning and made up an excuse about an emergency. They didn't seem surprised that I wanted to leave early. A few weeks later, I ran into the owner at a coffee shop. Feeling brave, I casually mentioned that I had heard strange noises. She went quiet. Then, after a long pause, she said, "You're not the first one to say that." A few months passed, and I tried to push the experience out of my mind. I even convinced myself that maybe it was just my imagination, some kind of waking dream or stress-induced hallucination. But then, something happened that shattered that illusion. One evening, I got a text from the homeowner. "Homeowner, hey, I know this is kind of random, but did anything weird happened when you stayed at our house?" My stomach dropped. I replied cautiously, what do you mean by weird?" She didn't text back for a few minutes, and I started to wonder if she had changed her mind about telling me anything. But then another message popped up. "Homeowner, I don't want to freak you out, but we've been hearing things. The same things you mentioned before. My husband thought it was just the house settling, but last night..." There was a long pause before another text came through. "Homeowner, last night, my daughter woke up screaming. She kept saying that someone was in her room. When I asked asked her who. She said, another pause. Homeowner. She said, the girl who wants to play. I nearly dropped my phone. I didn't know they had a daughter. When I was house sitting, there were no kids' rooms, no toys, nothing to indicate a child lived there. I had assumed they were an older couple. I took a shaky breath and typed back, wait, I thought you didn't have kids. She responded almost immediately, homeowner, we didn't. We adopted her 3 months ago. I stared at the message, trying to process. Their daughter hadn't been in the house when I was there, so how did whatever was in that house know to call itself the girl who wants to play? I decided right then that I didn't want to know more. I blocked the number, deleted the conversation, and made a mental note to never go near that house again. Months passed, and life moved on. I stopped thinking about the house, the eerie whispers, the strange text messages. It became one of those memories I shoved deep down, hoping it would eventually fade. But then, one night, it found me again. I was staying at my sister's apartment for the weekend while she was out of town. It was an old place, but cozy, and I had no reason to feel uneasy. That first night, I curled up on her couch, watching TV, and eventually dozed off. At exactly 3:12 a.m., I woke up to a noise. Laughter, soft and childlike. I jolted upright, my heart slamming into my ribs. I looked around, but the apartment was dark, empty, just as it should be. I told myself it was the TV, maybe some commercial playing in my dreams. And then, a whisper, I found you. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't coming from the TV. It wasn't my imagination. It was right behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly fell off the couch. But there was nothing there, just the dimly lit hallway leading to my sister's room. The air was heavy, electric, like the moment before a lightning strike. Every instinct in me screamed to get out, but my body refused to move. Then, from the hallway, something small ran past the doorway. I only caught a glimpse, just a flicker of movement, but I knew. It was a little girl. I never saw her face. Just a white nightgown, dark hair, and the way she moved too fast, too unnaturally, her feet barely making a sound. I grabbed my keys and bolted. I spent the rest of the night in my car, parked outside a 24-hour diner, chugging coffee and trying to convince myself I was losing my mind. I never told my sister what happened. When she got back, I made up some excuse and left. I rented a small house with 2 other friends, but during the summer, they both went back home, leaving me alone for 2 months. The house wasn't fancy, but it was cheap and close to campus. I didn't mind being alone. In fact, I liked it at first. I first noticed it about a week after they left. At night, usually when I was reading in bed or watching a show on my laptop, I'd hear a low humming sound. It wasn't coming from outside. It was inside the house. At first, I thought it was the pipes, maybe the water heater kicking on, but the sound wasn't mechanical. It had a rhythm to it, like someone quietly humming a tune they barely remembered. It would rise and fall, never forming a clear melody but distinctly human. I started investigating. I turned off all appliances, walked from room to room with my phone flashlight, and even put my ear against the walls. It never got louder or softer depending on where I was. It was just there, all around me, like the house itself was breathing a song. After a couple of weeks, I got used to it. It was creepy, sure, but it never did anything else. Just hummed. Then, one night, it changed. I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth when I heard it start again, but this time there were words, not full sentences, just murmurs in between the humming, like someone trying to talk in their sleep. I froze, toothbrush still in my mouth, listening. I couldn't make out the words, but the sound was closer, like someone was just outside the door. I whipped it open, expecting what? I don't know. The hallway was empty. The house was silent again. I didn't sleep much that night. For the next week, the voice got clearer. I could never quite make out what it was saying, but I knew it was talking to me, whispering something just at the edge of understanding. One night, I got fed up. I grabbed my phone, determined to record the sound. I sat in my bed, lights off, phone in my hands, waiting. Sure enough, the humming started again. I hit record, and then, for the first time, I heard it clearly. Why are you still here? The voice was right next to my ear. I jumped up, heart pounding, fumbling for the light. The second the bulb flickered on, the sound vanished. My room was empty. My phone was still recording. Shaking, I played the audio back. Nothing, just static. I left that house the next day and crashed at a friend's place until my lease was up. When my roommates came back, I asked them if they ever heard anything weird. They just laughed, but I saw something in their faces just for a second before they changed the subject. I moved out of that house as soon as my lease ended, and I never went back, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. For a while, I convinced myself it was just paranoia. My new place was in a different part of town, a busy apartment complex with neighbors on all sides. There was no way whatever it was had come with me. But then, a few months later, the humming started again. It was subtle at first. I'd be sitting in my living room, scrolling through my phone, and suddenly realized the air felt thicker, heavier, and underneath all the normal city noises, traffic, distant voices, the hum of my refrigerator, there was something else. That same soft, rhythmic tune. I tried to ignore it. I put on music, left the TV on, even ran a fan at night to drown it out. But the more I ignored it, the closer it got. One night, I woke up suddenly. No reason, no nightmare, just that feeling like someone had nudged me awake. The room was dark, the only light coming from my phone charging on the nightstand. I listened. At first, there was nothing, and then you left. I gasped, sitting up so fast I nearly fell out of bed. The voice was right next to me, close enough that I should have felt breath on my skin. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers shaking as I turned on the flashlight. The room was empty, but I knew I hadn't imagined it. That's when I noticed something else. The closet door was open, just an inch. I always kept it shut. Always. I sat frozen for what felt like an eternity, my breathing too loud in the silence. Then, slowly, I reached for my phone and opened the camera. I switched it to video and pointed it at the closet door, heart hammering in my chest. I whispered, "Who are you?" At first, nothing, just my own ragged breathing, the dim light of the phone screen reflecting off the closet door. And then, so faint I barely caught it, the humming, soft, almost hesitant, and then a voice, low and distant, like it was speaking through layers of static. I never left. The video cut out. My phone shut off completely, battery drained in an instant. I left that apartment that night. I didn't even pack. I just grabbed my keys and bolted. Slept in my car, shaking, heart pounding so hard it felt like it would crack my ribs. The next morning, I went back with a friend. Everything looked normal. My phone was working again, but the video file, nothing ever happened in that apartment again. No humming, no voices. But I don't sleep with the closet door open. I wish I could say that was the end of it, that I moved on, that whenever it was lost interest in me. But you don't get that lucky when something knows you. The humming stopped for a while. Months passed, then a year. I started feeling safe again. I even convinced myself it had all been in my head. Sleep paralysis, stress, some kind of auditory hallucination. Then, last week, it happened again. I was visiting my parents for the holidays, staying in my childhood bedroom. I hadn't thought about it in ages, but on my second night there, I woke up to a familiar sound. Low, soft, faint, humming. At first, I thought it was my mom, maybe moving around in the kitchen downstairs. But when I checked my phone, it was 3:12 a.m. I lay still, heart hammering, straining to hear. It was inside my room. The air was thick, heavy, pressing down on me. The same feeling I'd had back in the house, in the apartment, like something was watching me. And then a whisper barely above the humming. "You left." I jolted up, hands scrambling for the lamp on my nightstand. The second the light clicked on, the sound vanished. Nothing was there, but my bedroom door, which I had locked, was open, just an inch. I barely slept after that, but in the morning, when I brought it up casually to my mom, asking if she or my dad had been up during the night, she gave me a strange look. "We don't hear well at night anymore," she said with a small laugh. "Besides, you know how quiet it is out here." And that's when she said something that chilled me to my core. "You were such a funny kid. You used to hum in your sleep all the time." And I stared at her. "What?" She waved a hand dismissively. "Yeah, when you were little. I remember checking on you at night and hearing you humming to yourself. It was the weirdest thing, just this little tune over and over. You don't still do that, do you?" I went to school in a quiet town with a lot of old Victorian homes converted into student rentals. My roommates and I lived in one of these, 3 stories, creaky floors, and a weirdly large basement that none of us ever used. One night, I was home alone. My roommates were out at a concert, and I was stuck finishing a paper. I was at the kitchen table, deep in my laptop screen, when I felt it. That awful feeling, like when you're being watched. I turned my head slightly, eyes flicking to the dark hallway that led to the living room. Nothing, just the usual shadows. I shook it off and kept working, but the feeling didn't go away. It got worse. It was like someone was peering at me, their eyes pressing into my back, just waiting. I felt like if I turned my head too fast, I'd catch something standing right there. And then a noise, a quiet shuffle, like something shifting its weight, not from the hallway, from the ceiling, and I froze. Our attic was locked, and none of us ever went up there, but I heard it again, a dragging sound, slow, deliberate. I grabbed my phone, heart pounding. I texted my roommates, "When are you guys getting back?" Almost immediately, still at the venue, "Why?" I didn't respond. I stood up, every nerve in my body screaming. The kitchen suddenly felt too open, too exposed. I moved into the hallway, switching on every light as I went. The sound was gone now, but the feeling, the suffocating sense of being watched, was stronger than ever. I made my way to the living room, gripping my phone like a lifeline. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The curtains. We always kept the living room curtains drawn at night, but one panel had been pulled open just a sliver, just enough for someone to look in. I walked walked up to it, pulse hammering, and my own reflection stared back at me in the glass. Nothing outside, just darkness, and then a reflection moved behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly fell. Nothing. The house was empty. My breath was coming in short gasps. I ran back to the kitchen, turned on every damn light in the house, and stayed there until my roommates came home. The next day, I made them help me check the attic. The door was still locked, but we managed to pry it open. There was dust covering everything, thick and untouched. No footprints, no sign of anyone ever being there. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination. Maybe one of my roommates had left the curtain open and I just hadn't noticed. Maybe I was jumpy from too much caffeine and too little sleep. But then it kept happening. Every night, no matter how carefully I closed them, I'd wake up to find that same gap in the curtains. Sometimes wider, sometimes just a sliver. It was always just enough for someone or something to watch through. I started triple checking the locks. I made sure every window was shut tight. My roommates thought I was being paranoid, but I could tell it was getting to them too. One night, I stayed up later than usual, determined to catch whatever was happening in the act. I sat up on the couch with my laptop, keeping an eye on the curtains. Hours passed, nothing. I was about to give up when 3:17 a.m. A noise, not from upstairs, not from the walls, from outside, a quiet, shuffling sound just beyond the glass, right behind the curtain. My blood ran cold. I reached for my phone with shaking hands, but I was too scared to look away. My eyes stayed locked on that thin gap in the fabric, and then, for the first time, a hand, pale, long fingers, pressing gently against the glass like it was testing something. I don't remember breathing. I don't even remember moving. But suddenly I was in my roommate's room, shaking them awake in a panic. They groggily followed me back to the living room, but the hand was gone. The curtain was wide open now, the whole window exposed, but there was nothing outside, just our quiet street, empty sidewalk, and the glow of a single street lamp. My roommate flipped on the porch light and yanked open the front door. No footprints, no signs of anyone having been there at all. That was the last straw. The next day, we called our landlord and demanded they change the locks. They did, though they insisted there was no sign of forced entry. We even got a motion-activated security light. For a while, nothing happened. The curtains stayed shut. The house felt normal again, and then, a few weeks later, we were all sitting in the living room when my roommate suddenly froze. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I hadn't. We sat in tense silence, and then a thump from the attic. We all looked at each other, dread settling in our stomachs. We had checked the attic. It was empty. It had always been empty, right? One of my roommates grabbed a broom, the closest thing we had to a weapon, and we made our way upstairs. The attic door was still locked. No signs of movement. No more sounds. At this point, we were officially freaked out. The hand on the window, a noise in the attic, curtains that refused to stay closed. We were either losing our minds or something was playing with us. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe a draft was shifting the curtains. Maybe an animal had gotten into the attic. Maybe our minds were playing tricks on us. But then the whispering started. It was subtle at first, a barely there sound, like a TV playing too low to hear the words. I noticed it late at night when I was alone, a faint murmur just beneath the usual house noises. I thought it was coming from my roommate's room, but when I checked, she was asleep. The TV was off. The whispering was coming from inside the vents. That's when I truly started to lose it. I told my roommates the next day. One of them, Sam, decided to be brave and put her phone next to the vent in the living room, recording overnight. The next morning, she looked pale as a ghost. "There's something on the recording," she whispered. We all gathered around her phone as she hit play. The first few hours were just normal house sounds, pipes creaking, distant traffic. But then, around 2:49 a.m., whispering. None of us were awake at that time, but the voice, low, rasping, was unmistakable. "Let me in." We stared at each other, terrified. No one spoke. No one moved. Then Sam played the last part of the recording. At 3:17 a.m., right around the time I had seen the hand on the window, there was a sudden burst of static, and underneath it, a voice, clearer now, closer. "I'm already inside." That was it. We left that house within a week. We didn't care about breaking our lease. We didn't care about the deposit. We packed up and never looked back. I still don't know what was in that house. A spirit. Something worse. I don't have answers. But I do know one thing. When I moved into my new apartment, I made sure to check the curtains every night. And one morning, weeks after we left, Sam sent me a picture. It was from our old house. She had driven by out of curiosity, and at the living room window where we had seen the hand, the curtain was open. I used to work at a shopping mall that had been built in the 80 seconds, but by the time I was employed there, most of the stores had shut down. It was one of those places where only a few businesses were still hanging on: an old bookstore, a nail salon, and a Chinese buffet that always smelled weirdly like fish even when you ordered chicken. One night, I was closing up my store and I took the employee exit out the back. Normally, I'd just walk straight to my car, but that night, I noticed something odd. There was an old metal door propped open at the far end of the alley behind the mall. I had passed it 100 times before, but it was always locked. Curiosity got the better of me. I walked over, just intending to peek inside, but the second I got close, a strong draft of air hit me, pulling at my clothes like the place was breathing. Inside was a narrow, tiled tunnel. It looked like it was meant for maintenance, maybe an access corridor running under the mall. The walls were yellowed, and the tiles on the floor were cracked. The air smelled damp, like old pipes and mold. I told myself I'd just look for a second. My phone flashlight cut through the dark, revealing that the tunnel stretched on further than I expected. I figured I'd see a dead end or a stairwell, something that made sense. Instead, I saw footprints, not just one or two, dozens. Smudged, dusty footprints all over the floor. Some were fresh, some looked like they had been there for years. And they weren't all shoe prints. Some looked like they were made by bare feet. Then I heard it. A shuffle, not footsteps, not the sound of rats skittering, just a slow, dragging shuffle from somewhere deeper down the tunnel. I turned to leave, but just as I did, my flashlight caught something else. On the wall to my right, in faded, smeared black marker, were words: "If you hear it, don't let it hear you." I ran. The moment I turned, I swore I heard the shuffling pick up, like something was hurrying after me, but I didn't look back. I bolted out of the tunnel, my heartbeat slamming in my ears. I kicked the door closed behind me and didn't stop running until I was in my car. The next day, I told my manager about it, but he just shrugged and said that tunnel's been sealed for years. A few days passed, and I tried to push the whole thing out of my mind, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me out of that tunnel. At first, it was subtle. I'd be closing up the store, and I'd hear a faint shuffling noise from the back of the stockroom, just for a second, just barely loud enough to notice. I'd check, and of course, nothing was there. Then, my phone started glitching. It wasn't anything major, but weird little things. I'd set it down, and the flashlight would turn on by itself. One time, I opened my notes app and saw a new, untitled note that just had the number 33 typed over and over. I figured it was a glitch, or maybe my pocket had somehow typed it. But the longer I ignored it, the worse it got. One night, I was walking to my car when I heard shuffling footsteps in the empty parking lot behind me. Not just footsteps, dragging ones. I turned so fast I nearly tripped, expecting to see a homeless person or some late night weirdo. But the lot was completely empty, except for the wet, muddy footprints leading right up behind me. That was it. I told my manager everything. He gave me a weird look and finally admitted that the mall had a basement level that had been abandoned since the late 90 seconds. The tunnel I found was probably part of it, but the entrance had been officially sealed years ago. He swore up and down that no one could have been down there. I called BS. I did my own research. Turns out, back in 1998, there was a security guard who went missing during his shift. The only thing they found was his radio, still crackling in the basement. Officially, the story was that he must have quit and disappeared, but employees back then swore they heard footsteps under the floors long after he was gone. The more I read, the worse the feeling got, like I was being watched. That night, I woke up at exactly 3:33 a.m. to the sound of something moving outside my bedroom door. In slow, deliberate shuffle, I lay there, heart pounding, barely breathing. Then, just when I thought it was in my head, my phone lit up. A new notification. A note had been created in my phone, even though it had been off. Just one sentence: "If you hear it, don't let it hear you." I moved out of that town a month later. Moving away helped for a while. New city, new job, new routines. I convinced myself that whatever had followed me from that tunnel was a trick of my mind. Sleep deprivation, paranoia, maybe even some weird gas leak and that old mall messing with my head. But then, it found me again. I had been living in my new apartment for about 3 months when the first sign appeared. One morning, I woke up to find my phone had a new note, just like before. It simply said, 33 days. I didn't type it. I hadn't even touched my phone that night. I stared at the screen, feeling cold all over. Maybe it was some kind of delayed glitch. Maybe I had typed it in my sleep. I deleted it. 2 days later, I was walking home from work when I heard the shuffling. I was on a busy street, people around me, traffic rushing past, but somehow, underneath all the city noise, I could hear that familiar, dragging sound just behind me. I turned, nothing, but when I got home and took off my shoes, I found the footprints. Dirt, dusty smudges, leading from my front door to my bedroom. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I took my phone to a repair shop, thinking maybe some kind of malware had been causing these weird notes to appear. The guy at the store ran a diagnostic and looked at me like I was crazy. "Your phone's fine," he said, "but do you sleepwalk or something?" I shook my head. He hesitated before flipping the screen to show me my my Notes app's edit history. That note, the one that said 33 days. It had been updated, not once, not twice, 33 times. Each time, it had been saved at exactly 3:33 a.m. I didn't check my phone for the next few days. I turned it off at night, but that didn't stop the dreams. In them, I was back in the tunnel, but this time, I wasn't alone. There was something with me. I could hear its breathing, slow, wheezing. It never touched me, never showed its face. But in the dream, I knew it was standing just behind me, so close I could feel the air shift with its movements. Then, on the 33rd night, I woke up to something cold against my forehead. My phone, it was on my pillow, screen lit, open to the Notes app. One new entry, just one word, down. I moved out the next morning. I don't know if it's still following me, but sometimes when I walk alone at night, I still hear it. I went to a pretty normal high school in a small town, the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and waved at their neighbors. Nothing ever really happened there, but I swear, to this day, something was wrong with room 209. It started when I was assigned to Mr. Delaney's history class. The room itself wasn't anything special, standard desks, a whiteboard, a sad little window that barely let in light, but I quickly noticed something was. For one, no matter what time of day it was, there was always someone sitting inside. Even when our class was over and the next class wasn't scheduled for an hour, I'd pass by and see shadows moving inside. Sometimes, through the tiny window in the door, I'd catch glimpses of a figure sitting at a desk in the back row, staring at the board. But no one ever acknowledged the no teachers, no students, no janitors. I brought it up to my friend Lena, who had Mr. Delaney's class before me. "Oh yeah," she said, brushing it off. "That room is weird. No one ever really leaves it." I thought she was joking, but when I pressed her, she just changed the subject. One day, I forgot my notebook in the classroom and went back during lunch to grab it. The hallway was empty except for the sound of an old projector running inside room 209. When I peeked through the window, I saw the entire class still sitting at their desks. It took me a second to process. My class had ended nearly 40 minutes ago, yet there they were, every single student, sitting in perfect silence. Mr. Delaney was at his desk, flipping through a book like nothing was wrong. I knocked lightly. No one turned. I knocked harder. Nothing. Then, all at once, they turned to look at me, not gradually, not like they heard me late. Every single head in that room snapped toward me at the same time. I stumbled back, and suddenly the bell rang. When I looked again, the room was completely empty. The desks were pushed in. The whiteboard was clean. No projector. No students. Mr. Delaney wasn't even there. I tried to convince myself that I had imagined it. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I had been looking into another classroom and didn't realize it. But I knew that wasn't true. For the rest of the year, I refused to linger in room 209 after class. The moment the bell rang, I packed my stuff and left as fast as I could. But I started noticing things. Small things at first, like how Mr. Delaney never dismissed us himself. The bell would ring, and he'd just sit there, staring down at his book or the wall, as if he hadn't even heard it. Or how no one ever stayed behind to ask questions or chat with friends. The second class ended, we all just instinctively left. One day, as we filed out, I glanced back and saw something that made my stomach drop. My entire class, everyone who had just left with me, was still sitting inside. They weren't us exactly, but they looked like us. Same faces, same clothes, same postures. They were just sitting there, facing forward, blank-eyed. I blinked, and the room was empty again. I didn't tell Lita this time. I was afraid of what she'd say. A few weeks later, Mr. Delaney got sick, and we had a sub. I don't remember her name, but she was young, probably fresh out of college. The moment she stepped inside room 209, she hesitated. She looked around like she was expecting something to be different. Halfway through the lesson, she stopped mid-sentence and frowned. "Is there another class in here after this?" she asked. We all shook our heads. Her face paled. She kept glancing toward the back of the room where no one was sitting. Her voice got quieter as she continued the lesson, and by the time the bell rang, she practically ran out. The next day, Mr. Delaney was back. I asked what had happened to the sub. He just looked at me and said she decided not to come back. On the last day of school, I had to pass room 209 one final time. I tried to ignore it, but something pulled me toward the door. The room was dark now, the desks stacked on top of each other for summer break, but something was still in there. A single figure sat in the back row, facing the board. They were completely still, except for their head, which slowly turned toward me. It was May. My own face, my own clothes, my own expression, blank and waiting. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I thought leaving high school meant leaving room 209 behind, but I was wrong. For years, I pushed the memories away. College, work, moving to a new city, it all helped. out. I never talked about it, never looked up old yearbooks, never even drove near my hometown. Then, last week, I got an email. At first, I thought it was spam. The subject line just said, "Did you forget something?" No sender band, just an old school email address I hadn't used since high school. I almost deleted it, but curiosity got the better of me. The email was empty. No text, no attachments, just a single image. It was a photo of an empty classroom. The desks were arranged in neat rows. The whiteboard was blank, but I recognized it immediately. Room 209, and in the very back row, there was a figure sitting at a desk. It was blurry, but I knew. It was May. I tried to forget the email, but then 2 days later, Lena called me. We hadn't spoken in years, not since high school, but she sounded shaken. "Did you get the email?" she asked. I froze. "He got one too. Not just me," she whispered. "Everyone from our class. The ones who had Delaney's history class." My stomach dropped. "Lena," I said slowly, "who sent it?" She hesitated. Then she said something that made my blood turn to ice. "It was from Mr. Delaney's email. None of us wanted to go back, but when I heard that people had started disappearing, I knew we didn't have a choice. First, it was Dan. His sister said he never came home from work. Then Maya, her roommate, found her keys still in the door, her phone buzzing with missed calls, but no sign of her. By the time it reached 5 people missing, we knew it was a message. It was calling us back. So last night, for the first time in over a decade, I stood outside my old high school. The parking lot was empty, the building dark, but when we stepped inside, the lights flickered on, humming with electricity. It was waiting for us. We walked the familiar hallways in silence. Every step felt heavier. When we reached room 209, the door was already open. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.